You're listening to a Mamamia podcast.
Mamamia acknowledges the traditional owners of land and waters that this podcast is recorded on. Hello and welcome to Mamamia Out Loud, what women are actually talking about on Wednesday, the 6th of March. I'm Holly Wainwright.
My name's Mia Freedman.
And I'm Jessie Stevens.
And on the show today, a very popular modern guru, so much so that he presided over J-Lo and Ben's wedding, has had his credentials questioned. Why are you seeing the name Jay Shetty everywhere this week? Also, whatever pants you're wearing, if they're not ridiculous, they're wrong. And the woman who's coming for gentle parenting and therapy. Why one interview is in all of our group chats. But first,
In case you missed it, friends, the bush is back. At the recent Maison Margiela fashion show in Paris, models wore sheer skirts and dresses made of like tulle and gauzy fabrics, and you could see their quite voluminous pubic hair underneath.
I've noticed this at the beach.
Well, I was going to say a little bit confusing because most models have to remove their pubes as a job requirement so that they can model. Well, they were, Holly, funnily enough.
Oh.
They were merkins, pubic wigs. The merkin is one of my, I wouldn't say it's my Roman Empire, but it's a favourite niche topic of mine that I like to talk about.
It's a fun word to say.
It is a fun word. Look, this is wonderful news for anyone who permanently pruned their pubes into oblivion with laser, or perhaps is too impatient to wait for their hair to grow out, because you too can wear a pubic wig under your sheer clothes, or perhaps at the beach poking out of your swimwear, or even dangling down underneath the bottom of a short skirt.
May I ask a question regarding
Please.
the merkin?
Mm-hmm.
My question is about how one fastens a merkin
Yes.
to a bald vulva.
Yes. Well, there are a couple of different ways. It can be adhesive, a little bit like double-sided fashion tape would work it.
Yeah.
Or you can have a merkin that is like on a G-string.
Oh, nice.
Like just with literally some strings on the side and one up your back area and the big tuft at the front.
And is the merkin, it obviously does the front bush.
Yeah.
Does it give a little bit in between, a little bit of butt
A
bush?
little underbush and bum bush? It's a really good question. You can customise your merkin. Like there's lots of different merkins available, Jessie, so I'm sure there'll be one for you.
they are quite expensive, but that is good news for those of us who do not require a merkin to make our beach look a little bit more current.
My Roman Empire is that Emma Watson uses pubic oil. I'll never forget that fact. She put pubic oil in there to just make it silky and smooth.
Is that like beard oil, but you put it on your pubes?
Yeah, apparently it's very luxurious.
Why did you become a monk and how long did that last? And
Absolutely. Well, I'm so grateful to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
When I was growing up in London, I had three choices to be a doctor, a lawyer, or a failure. And I ended up at business school, so I guess I was the third. And I was going to business school, and every week we had CEOs, entrepreneurs, celebrities coming to speak and share their stories. And I was fascinated by how people went from nothing to something. Mm-hmm. And one week I was told that this monk was invited. And I actually said to one of my friends, I said, I'm only going if we go to a bar afterwards, because I wasn't interested in hearing a monk's perspective on life. So my friend forced me to go. He promised me we would go to a bar afterwards. And it changed my life. So I spent all of my summer holidays from 18 to 22, aged 18 to 22, half of them working in the finance corporate world in suits and driving cars in London, and spending the other half living as a monk in India. And when I was 22, I decided to turn down my corporate job offers and go and live as a monk in India for 3 years.
Have you two heard of Jay Shetty?
I'm dimly aware of him. He is like a self-helpy guy.
Yep. So he's a podcaster, author, self-help guru. And I'm going to tell you the story of how a man named John McDermott was meant to be writing a pretty straightforward profile on Jay Shetty for Esquire, and then he suddenly turned it into a very eye-opening investigation. He discovered a few plot holes in the origin story of Jay Shetty. He wrote for The Guardian, uncovering the higher truth of Jay Shetty. So Shetty hosts a podcast called On Purpose. You might have seen it in the charts.
Yeah, it does really well. And wasn't he like the celebrant at J-Lo's recent wedding to Ben Affleck.
Yep.
And he's had every enormous person on his podcast, and he's like a real Hollywood guru.
Yeah, so he interviews the most famous people in the world, most recently President Joe Biden about his mental health, Will Smith, Oprah Winfrey, Michelle Obama, Esther Perel, everyone. He's positioned as a guru. He's the author of Think Like a Monk and more recently 8 Rules of Love, which was a New York Times bestseller. And last year, I actually interviewed him on the project and I was fascinated to meet him because I knew that he came with like this cult of personality. And
Was he on the desk or was he?
Yeah, he was on the desk.
What's his vibe?
He had incredible gravitas and like presence.
How old is he?
He is 36. He's married and I think he's got like 14 million followers on Instagram. He's massive. Anyway, every guru needs an origin story. And you heard a little bit of his there in that clip with Ellen. So he's born in London to immigrant parents. He goes to business school. But he skips a graduation ceremony and moves to India to an ashram to become a monk for 3 years. He was such a recluse that he didn't even know who the Prime Minister was. When he returned from India, he began making YouTube videos about the meaning of life, purpose, relationships, and it became a rags to riches story about a penniless monk who, you know, is now worth millions. John McDermott, the journalist, he couldn't make this timeline work. He interviewed people who knew Shetty at the time, who said he did visit India sort of on holidays, but he definitely didn't spend 3 years there. In fact, his stint as a monk was spent mostly at an estate outside London, which according to McDermott is actually supported by a travel blog that Shetty was writing at the time. Shetty has always said he was so ensconced in his studies, you know, he wasn't involved in the modern world. But associates say that he spent a lot of time filming viral YouTube videos, and one said, I saw him in sweatpants more than I saw him in robes. There have been accusations of plagiarism. He's had to remove upwards of 100 videos off YouTube, and he's got this life coaching program that he charges more than $11,000 a term for. It's questionable claims about his credentials. People think this course might be a bit of an MLM.
Was he a Hare Krishna? Was there like Hare Krishna in his background?
Yes. So that's what's sort of been revealed, that might have actually been more of the spiritual origin story, but he's really hidden that because it's unpopular and because it's fallen very out of favour.
He's taken things from Eastern philosophy and religion and sort of westernized them, but what he doesn't say what the religion is. Like, is it Hinduism? Is it?
I guess it's Shettyism.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So he's kind of made his own spirituality.
Yeah, and it's this classic guru thing. He positions himself as a prophet. Mia, lots of people love Jay Shetty. They will say, Jay Shetty changed my life. I listened to him. He helped me find my purpose. Does his origin story really matter that much?
I don't think it does. I read this investigation and it's very detailed and it's like, but this and this that year and he didn't say this, but he did say this. And I just kept saying, so what? To me, it feels like a victimless crime because if someone's teachings help you, I mean, Oprah helps a lot of people. The things that she says, she doesn't have qualifications as a guru. Like the fact that he was a monk or not a monk, he's obviously an outstanding communicator and he's able to synthesize and repackage information in a way that's really popular and presumably helpful to many millions of people. When he was in Australia, I know some people who went to see him live. He was doing like live shows. Some of the things he was doing in those live shows seem questionable.
They were a bit Tony Robbins.
Yeah.
Well, things like I was reading in this investigation, he got this woman on stage and got her to call her estranged brother and then leave a voicemail message in front of everybody. I'm wary about that sort of mainstream mass therapy because I think when it's on an individual basis, asking individual people to do specific things, it can be really dangerous. But I don't know. I'm not that scandalized by the fact that he maybe was not really a monk and maybe he's just a really good salesman.
I know what you mean, Mia, because really in this time, is selling self-help any different from selling shoes or software or, you know, serums? Like, is it really? I think probably the reason why this has pricked everybody's ears up is because even this phrase from a penniless monk, you know, to a millionaire is very much part of his story. So if there was never any penniless monk, it definitely paints him as more of a charlatan, more of a snake oil salesman. But you're right that he's probably transcended that part of his story now. And if his teachings do help people, then they help people. But it's very clever in an era when we love gurus, but we are cynical about organized religion, to make yourself a religious guru who transcends religion. So what they're sort of saying here is that if his background and his upbringing was very much in Hare Krishna, but he has distanced himself from that, or if it had been in Hinduism, but he doesn't call it Hinduism, it means your market is infinite then, right? Because if he was doing strictly Buddhist teachings, that would create a barrier for some people. If he was doing strictly Hare Krishna teachings, that would be a barrier for some people who don't want to give up, drugs, alcohol, sex, caffeine, all those things. So if you can package transcendence as something that doesn't come with any actual religious cost or doctrine, you can get really, really rich, which is what Jay Shetty has done. But does it make him a bad person?
I agree with what you say about when you can draw on all of those things. In a world with declining religious adherence, what he's done is quite smart, which is to draw on the limitless teachings of religion. And I remember sitting there hearing him and I was like, okay, so that's Buddhism, that's Hinduism, that's Carl Jung, that's blah. Like, none of it's original. But that's the case with all self-help gurus. And so the plagiarism thing I almost ignored because
I think to be a self-help guru, you have to be, it's about communication.
Yeah.
Because you said that's Jung, that's whatever. I don't know that. I'm not going to go and read Jung and whatever. So if someone can give me the crib notes on Instagram in a 20-second reel that I can maybe think about, I was just looking at his Instagram and he says things like, the biggest mistake we make is that we control our partner and try to change them to think that it'll make us happy. But in actual fact, who we fell in love with is the person they are. I mean, I'm mangling it, but he'll say something really basic. But basic things are true. Like, they're truisms for a reason.
Yeah. And in that way, I mean, the origin story is clearly what got him sitting across from Ellen. In order to even get a seat at the table, to have any currency with celebrities, you need that. And Americans love nothing like they love a rags to riches. Like, they clearly bought into that. But if you looked at anyone's origin story, because it has to be a very coherent narrative. So this John McDermott who's going, was it 18, 19 or 20? I'm like, I've told stories on this podcast where I probably said I was 18 and I was 22. Like, I don't think people can remember.
That's not a smoking gun.
Yes, and for the sake of coherence, when he's speaking to Ellen, it's not very interesting to say, I went to India for 3 months, but then I spent most of my time just out of London, blah, blah, blah. Doesn't mean he wasn't being deliberately misleading. I think he probably was. But I don't think this is going to hurt Jay Shetty. And I don't think it'll hurt him because of the fracturing of the internet. Jay Shetty's fans are probably not reading this Guardian article. We exist in different spheres. So if I follow Jay Shetty, if I'm one of the 14 million people in his sphere, and I find it quite telling that Jay Shetty is yet to really acknowledge this. He spoke to John McDermott through lawyers, but he is being clever in that I reckon if he doesn't say any of this, most people will miss it unless it infiltrates TikTok, which it sort of has. An ex-girlfriend has jumped on TikTok and sort of said, I was with him and he wasn't in India for that long.
But it's a bit so what?
The beauty of being a guru who's outside the mainstream, and I mean, it's an imperfect comparison, but look at the conversations we're having around Russell Brand, is you've insulated yourself from needing to defend yourself in that way. And I know that the allegations levelled at these two men are incredibly different, and that what Jay Shetty is so far being accused of, if anything, is embellishing the truth and pruning his timeline to make more sense. It's certainly not on the same scale. But gurus have followers, and followers will follow you blindly. If you have done something good for me, if you have made my life better, I will believe that the people who are criticising you are non-believers who don't get it. Right? So it's interesting, though, that I think we probably give a little more grace to a man doing this than we would to a woman. We'd probably be quicker to say con woman if it was. But, you know, he has all of the shine of all the Hollywood people. Gwyneth loves him. As you say, J-Lo loved him so much she got him to be in her movie that we talked about last week. And I think that he can easily dismiss this as tall poppy.
And McDermott, if he is being really honest with himself, I went through how he was talking about it on Twitter. I don't think he likes Jay Shetty. I think he went to Jay Shetty's show and he went, I hate this. And he's a cynic. And you know what? Same. I've got a part of that where I do not generally like self-help gurus. I find the lack of qualifications worrying. I find their confidence really confronting. I think a lot of what they say is very banal. But I wonder if he custom fit the unpicking of the origin story to kind of say something new about Jay Shetty. Because as you say, I kept waiting for the bombshell and I didn't feel like there really was a bombshell there.
There was not really any there.
And if you've got a problem with the new age of gurus, which Helen Lewis, we talked a while ago about an incredible podcast she did, I think that's your problem. And I totally get it. The idea that we don't have, because of declined religious adherence, these new prophets who are positioning themselves as all-knowing, there's lots of problems with that. And I think that's probably what we should be unpacking rather than the specific details of someone's story.
Cynic in me would throw in, though, that considering that Jay Shetty has only been communicating with this journalist through lawyers, what was in that article is what they could get to stand up absolutely watertight.
Point.
So this could be about creating a smoke of there's something dodgy about that guy that may or may not have more to it. Do you know what I mean? Think about the legals that piece would have had to go through for a man of Shetty's influence and wealth.
I think it's interesting what you said about qualifications and the difference between an origin story and qualifications. And does an origin story matter? I take your point that qualifications are relevant. We're going to be talking about somebody else later in the show who's written a book declaring all sorts of things based on research, has no specific qualifications in that area. When I think about some of the, I guess you would call them self-help gurus in a way, that have been meaningful to me, like Elizabeth Gilbert, Glennon Doyle, they don't have qualifications. They have origin stories. Elizabeth Gilbert, her marriage dissolved and she was crying on the floor and she went on this, long trip around the world, which became Eat, Pray, Love. And
so
then
you would feel cheated if that story went true?
I wouldn't. Oh, well,
yes,
would
you
I?
would.
That's a good question. And then for Glennon Doyle, she also was on a bathroom floor crying. She had been an addict and she found herself unexpectedly pregnant. If that wasn't true, I'd be bummed.
See,
but I don't need her to be qualified. And that to me, like the idea that someone's a liar is interesting. But then how much is the difference between lying and marketing, like embellishing a story versus, completely making something up? I'm like, what is interesting to me is the experiences that she's had in her life and her ability to articulate things that are meaningful to me and that make me think and that have made me change the way I think.
But your appeal, like I'm looking at Oprah Winfrey, right? Oprah's origin story is central to her appeal because what it tells us is I was once either like you or I am the every woman. There is something about Oprah that's like a real rags to riches, right? Mm-hmm. And we almost don't hate her for her wealth or hate her for her power because it's so self-made. Like the self-made story means I can root for you in a real way. So if I found out that actually Oprah was always loaded and all of those things, that tragic childhood wasn't true, I would feel cheated, I think.
Of course you would, because it would also change the intention. It's the idea that if you find out that somebody who you really respect and admire has tricked you, has fooled you, has pulled the wool over your eyes in order to make money from you, then they've lost their credibility.
Studies show that when you're in
Mamamia out loud!
you can't be in another state. So you can't be angry or sad or disappointed.
If pubic wigs weren't exciting enough for one show, I have more news from Planet Fashion. And it's this. Pants are drunk and they need to go home. You are not imagining it. Pants are getting wider and they have now reached seemingly absurd proportions. And what's going on? Well, I'm so glad you asked, because in a New York Times piece this week called Why Are Pants So Big Again?, writer Jonah Weiner looks at this latest swing from skinny to wide pants and what it tells us about ourselves, our relationships, not just with wide pants, but our relationship with pants. If you've been into a shop lately, you will know that 2024 is shaping up as the year of the large pant, even larger than 2023. There are wide-legged jeans, sailor pants, cargo pants, flared pants, slacks, palazzo pants, which are a nice throwback. And in this piece, Jonah writes, at some point in the past few years, as if we didn't have enough to worry about, everyone's pants started to look wrong. For an improbably long time, the right pants, meaning those that conveyed some socially agreed upon baseline level of stylishness, had been, in a word, small. Fitted was the way good pants were supposed to fit. And then in a rupture whose centre I place within the broader pandemic era upheavals of 2020, the right pants began to lurch away from the leg at scale. Jeans, a kind of patient zero for pants trends, showed symptoms of acute onset elephantitis. I love this piece because I know that in my wardrobe, my pants are all very, very wide. I don't even know if I have any skinny pants left because last year fashion was very firm about declaring skinny jeans dead, which ended a very long run since they turned up in our wardrobes around 2005. And we started to see last year this move towards man-style suits with those oversized jackets and big roomy pants. And a lot of women, myself included, were excited about this because who doesn't want more room in their pants, I ask you? Now, neither of you wear big pants.
Absolutely not.
We've changed the shape though. I went and bought those. You had Zara jeans on. I went and bought the same Zara jeans because I couldn't be trusted. What I realised.
You looked so modern, I thought.
Yeah. And now I'm not sure about them. Now I'm not sure. I don't know.
Oh, you
They're
look
not big
so
enough.
good.
They're
You
not
need
big
them to
enough.
be bigger.
Yes. Because they're still a bit fitted up the top. And I read this and I went, it crystallises an issue that I've had for maybe 2 years, which is that my pants betray the fact that I don't know who I am. And my pants should be clearer about marking my identity. And I'm having the same issue with shoes.
Speak more about the pants.
The idea that the uglier they are, the more in style they are, I'm having issues getting my head around. There's a really good tweet that is quoted in this that says, whatever style pants look like shit to you are the pants you're supposed to wear. And as soon as they start to look normal to you, those are not the right pants anymore. You should always be wearing pants you think look stupid. And I think the same is true of shoes. Holly.
How stupid are your pants?
They're not stupid at all. The reason why people get very upset when you come for their jeans, remember the outrage about the aforementioned skinny jeans ban, is because most ordinary people buy a couple of pair of jeans and wear them for years, like literally years, because they're quite expensive. We all hate shopping for them. There's nothing more confronting than standing in a changing room looking at yourself in a pair of jeans.
Speak for yourself. I love buying jeans.
Well, you love buying everything,
It's a little
but
treat.
you're only representative of a certain percentage of people who like shopping and love fashion, right?
I'm holding up the economy, Holly Wainwright.
You are, and
Shut
I
up.
admire it. And I always come to you and say, when I'm in the need of a refresh and I'm like, what should I do? So you're very important and the right person to bring this story. But the rest of us are not going to wear ridiculous pants. We will wear a version in that. Remember the famous monologue in Devil Wears Prada when Meryl Streep's character explains to Anne Hathaway's character that the blue she was wearing was really on the catwalk several years ago and it's been watered down to whatever tragic little bargain bin she dragged it out of.
What you don't know is that sweater is not just blue. It's not turquoise. It's not lapis. It's actually cerulean.
This is the same thing for most normal people with pants. Is I graduated from skinny to like straight leg to wide leg, and maybe in 3 years I'll start wearing enormous ones, by which time they've gone back. But I have noticed this in my life thanks to my daughter, because I bought her a pair of jeans that she begged for Christmas that were not cheap, and they were really high-waisted and relatively not baggy. Fast forward 6 weeks, she cannot be seen in those jeans. She cannot be seen. The link that she sent me to for the next jeans, they're low rise and really massive.
Okay, Holly, this is my theory as well, right? It's because of social media and there not being a consensus on any trend. Firstly, there are lots of micro trends always, so it's very confusing for those of us who just want to play by the rules and be invisible.
Or just not look weird.
I just don't want to look weird. Yeah. But because of globalization and the fact I go onto my phone and I see these jeans everywhere, whatever, the oversaturation point happens within 6 weeks. So it used to be that like, you know, a high-waisted skirt had a good 3 years in it. And then we'd go, you know what, I've seen that everywhere, getting a bit old. Now the trends are going so fast because of all the media we consume, that by the time we've bought the jeans, they're out. And for those of us who are trying...
I don't think that's true because I've been wearing wide-legged jeans. It's just by the time you come around to a trend, it's over.
Some of us...
And you only get 2 minutes before you're back in fashion purgatory.
But I don't want to buy new clothes every season. I'm trying to be sustainable and have one pair of pants. And the thing about a pair of pants is that I should be able to wear them every day with everything for 10 years.
But if you start a little earlier in the trend, you'll get more longevity.
But sometimes early in a trend, if you jump too early, boom, it was actually a micro trend and you screwed it.
I saw some skinny jeans in the wild the other day and they were worn by producer M. Explain yourself to us because I was delighted to see them in the wild.
Well, producer M is a millennial like me.
Can I just say I'm very all about people wearing whatever makes them feel good.
I'm just too lazy to go shopping.
Yeah, see, this is exactly the point, right? Most people do not shop all the time.
Have you been tempted by a wide-legged jean? Do you put your skinnies, because skinnies are not comfortable, Em.
I've tried on the wide-legged jean trend at Zara recently and I don't think it suits me. I feel weird.
Did you feel like an Oompa Loompa?
Yeah.
Short people,
it can
be. Well, we're all short.
Yeah.
But this is the problem. It actually is very flattering and also just more comfortable. I'm going to bring in some wide-legged jeans and pants. I'm going to get you all to try them on. We're going to have a little play. Come on, I'm going to bring you into 2022 at least.
Oh my gosh, you're so judgmental.
Every Tuesday and Thursday, we drop new segments of Mamamia Out Loud just for Mamamia subscribers. Follow the link in the show notes to get your daily dose of Out Loud, and a big thank you to all our current subscribers. There's a new parenting guru on the block and she's coming for gentle parenting and therapy and even school counsellors. She's called Abigail Shrier. She's an American writer and she's the author of a new book called Bad Therapy: Why the Kids Aren't Growing Up. And she's the latest to weigh into relatively well-trodden territory by now about generally what's wrong with the young people, also known as an attack on how Gen X have parented their kids. Helicopter parents, gentle parents. She argues in her book that these approaches have and are producing a generation who are incapable of handling challenges, are paralysed by both real and imagined mental health issues, and have been convinced that any bad feeling is dangerous and traumatic. She also argues that therapy for children, generally speaking, does more harm than good. Now, before we go on with this conversation about Shrier, it's worth noting that she is quite controversial. In the past week or so, promoting this book, she's appeared on Jordan Peterson's podcast, Joe Rogan's podcast, and Barry Weiss's podcast to promote bad therapy. And all of these people are people often framed as heroes of a certain conservative pushback culture who are very much against what they call wokeism. She also wrote a book called Irreversible Damage about gender therapy in children, which enraged a lot of people. But for the purposes of this conversation, we're focusing on her position, shared by many, many parents and educators and experts, that young people are in an anxious mess because their parents have never taught them resilience, and specifically, according to Shrier, that kids are over-therapized, over-medicated, and that parental authority has been undermined by a culture of deferring to a mental health-first approach to raising kids. Here's a bit where she's talking about what she sees as the big problem with kids these days.
There's no question, but we did come to see our kids as weak. We came to see them as infants. The problem is we had traditions of child rearing. We had a sense of knock it off, shake it off, you'll be fine. Not for a kid who broke an arm, but for minor injuries. We used to tell our kids that. We remember that from our own childhoods. But we stopped trusting ourselves and relied on experts. And they taught us that our kids were weak, that they could never recover.
I'm not a big fan of Abigail's message, but many, many people are. Jessie, you shared the first interview we heard with Shrier with me in a heartbeat. What fascinated you about it so much?
I'll start by saying I do not agree with everything that Abigail Shrier says. I think that people who have children with diagnoses and who have chosen to go down the medication route, I support their decision wholeheartedly. And that's actually not who I think the focus of what she's talking about is about. I think that that can kind of be roped off. What I found interesting was the majority of kids and how there's been an undermining of parental authority. Holly, you said that you think the blame is with Gen X parents. That's not who I see the blame with. I think she's saying that the blame is almost more with the experts who are telling you this is how you have to speak to your kids. Kids need to be in therapy, all that kind of stuff. And the reason that this resonated with me...
Well, she says that the blame is that the parents, we've swallowed it wholeheartedly. So we're just parroting it back. Weak parenting and what she calls permissive parenting is very much in her sights, right?
Yes, but I think she's saying parents have been told to do that. She's not necessarily blaming them.
That memo that we got, that Glennon Doyle talks about, that we got at the hospital, which is don't ever let anything bad happen to your child, and your child's self-esteem is the most important thing and you must preserve it at all costs.
Yes. So look, I don't often quote myself, but I went, this reminds me of something I wrote in 2019. And the headline on a website called Mamamia was Paralysis Parenting. You're not imagining it. The kids are in charge. And this is how I opened my article. When parents pick their kids up from a childcare centre in Sydney's West, Nicholas says they rarely tell their kids it's time to go home. Instead, they suggest it, or they pose a question with an air of hesitation. Should we go home now? They ask their 3-year-old. Then there's the students in Ashley's maths class. Just this week, a girl forgot her homework. By recess, her mother was at the school gate, the exercise book under her arm. And the teacher said, I felt, really bad for her mum. Her time is worth more than her kid's detention. My argument there, and that first person, Nick, was my brother. As someone who is surrounded by teachers, this is what teachers have been talking about for probably 15 years, which is that there has been an undermining of adult authority. Parents are terrified for really good reason, which Abigail Shrier says. Parents are terrified that their kids are depressed and that they will hurt themselves. And that is a message that we are being given and that is real. The fact that kids are more unhappy now than they were generations ago, that's true. Every data set, all the analysis, when I was writing my book, I was looking into this going, is it just overdiagnosis? It's not. Kids are less happy now than they were in our grandparents' generation.
But have we accidentally robbed them of the ability to build resilience? Because resilience, even though we're a generation of parents who are obsessed with building it in our children, inadvertently we've dismantled it by firstly letting them believe that they're always in charge, and that thing of avoid tantrums by giving them a choice. Would you like this for dinner or this for dinner? I think that all of this has been accidental because back to your point about there's no question that we've got the most unhappy, anxious, depressed. But what came first, the chicken or the egg? So is it because of the way that we parented them? Again, not our fault. We thought we were doing the right thing. But in actual fact, by snow ploughing and concierging and helicoptering and removing every potential obstacle, making sure they didn't experience any negative emotion like disappointment or frustration or anger or sadness, we thought we were helping them, but in actual fact, we fucked them.
I think the cure is worse than the disease. So the chicken or the egg thing, I don't even think we know for sure. But this cure, I think the argument that this isn't making things better is true because that's what the data says, that there is an emotional hypochondria, that they're constantly asking how you're feeling, and that the sense that you are entitled to happiness is maybe something that, our grandparents didn't have. But the parental authority thing, I think, is the most interesting point because she makes the point that children should aspire to adulthood. They should see adulthood as something that they want, and the adults are in charge and they know what they're doing because it makes them feel safe and like there are boundaries.
And adults have rights and privileges that kids don't have.
And interesting lives that aren't just all about service to their children.
Yes. Whereas if you look unsure, if you are constantly being undermined, I feel this with an 8-month-old, that my instincts are constantly being undermined and that I feel like I need a PhD to raise a child. And you don't need a PhD to raise a child. And therefore, when you go into a situation like that with fear and uncertainty, kids can smell it and then they're like, oh shit, not even my mum knows what she's doing.
That feels unsettling for a child.
Yeah. Holly, what did you make of this?
Of course, I agree. I live in the same world that you guys live in, that we know that anxiety is a massive issue, particularly with teenage girls. We know that teachers are struggling enormously. But I'm almost allergic to this, blame the parents from a generation who grew up in an incredibly different world with incredibly different pressures, right? Technology is a massive factor in this, not only for kids, but for parents, in that our parenting has never been so surveyed, judged, informed. Most parents have never read a parenting book, right? Most of us have not. But we are constantly given the messages that Abigail's talking about and others about how we should do it. And so I think you can't ignore that. I also think that what I hear a lot in Abigail's message in particular is a conservative dog whistle about the way families used to be, in inverted commas, in a world where maybe mum was at home and there was always somebody there to discipline, police, guide, and all of those things. So we weren't living in a world that was either work obsessed or very insecure economies where, I mean, she's talking about Americans, right? A lot of Americans have to have many jobs, shift jobs, to keep their families afloat. So who does she think should be doing all this policing, guiding, parenting? And then she talks about our families are too small and we don't have enough extended family around us. That speaks very much to the fact that people move around all the time. Like, I just think that there is a simplistic and inherently conservative yen for this world that we think used to exist. The other thing is, she speaks a lot in these interviews about how people used to be good, like people used to be resilient and tough and good people, and now that we're not. And I think that nearly all of us could point to a million examples in our life of people, probably including our own parents, who were brought up in a very different way, and yet they are not perfect. They are not anxiety-free. Their lives aren't issueless, frictionless. They don't do bad things. You know, I think it's a very simplistic view of the world.
Yeah, I agree with some of those points. The parts that I find most compelling are the ones that are backed by data. So yes, those generations weren't perfect, and we can talk about gambling addicts and alcoholism, and we might not have called it depression, but...
And repression. Like, I know she's very anti-therapy, and I'm not a particularly therapized person, but the repression that was suffered from generations and generations of people who weren't dealing or talking about their issues. What is the gentle parenting a reaction to? You know what I mean? Like, where did that memo come from? A lot of it's a reaction to the parenting that our generation and the generation above us got.
Or is it that therapy psychology speak, has exploded in quite an uncontrolled way and infiltrated every conversation, every relationship? She makes the point that we think therapy is harmless, you know, whether it's a kid seeing a school counsellor or it's certain language that we're using. You kind of go, look, even if it's not helping, it's not going to cause any harm. But I remember learning this in psychology, that there are certain forms of therapy or psychological debriefing that do more harm than good. It came up in the media recently with the Hunter Valley bus crash. There was an article in The Conversation that said, after a traumatic, and I use that word consciously.
But this was an actual trauma.
This was a trauma.
So there's one of her points is that we've now completely flattened terms like trauma and even anxiety to, yes, the Hunter Valley bus crash, but also your cat died or your boyfriend broke up with you.
Yes. But let's say that something happened in the workplace, right, that was a genuine trauma. It is psychological advice that you do not do a psychological debriefing where you have someone come in and talk to you. Because the way that real trauma works is that it moves through everyone in very different ways. You might not sleep that night. You might have flashbacks, all really normal. But for 75% of people, you will be okay. In fact, coming and putting certain words and ruminating and asking certain leading questions can make the problem worse. So if we know that to be true, but then it has entered every classroom and it's entered every parent-child relationship where we're saying, how does that make you feel? Are you feeling sad? Are you having a negative emotion? Is that being so leading that we're sort of leading the witness to such a point that those emotions are coming up? I thought that was a really fresh idea that makes sense to me.
So you mean like if you asked someone constantly, are you hungry? Are you hungry?
Yeah.
Are you hungry? You're putting hunger and food at the forefront. And the same if you're constantly, and it all comes from being so well-meaning and being so worried that, you know, feeling like our job and our purpose as parents is to help our children and to get them through life.
But you know what? Like, that is a very good point. It's also way above most of our pay grades to discuss what is the appropriate psychological response to trauma, right? Including Abigail Shrier's pay grade, to be honest. But the idea that school counsellors you know, in your average school who are stepping into a kid who seems to be troubled are coming with some sort of agenda, a therapized agenda that is anti-parent, I think is really dangerous. Because to be honest, thank God for school counsellors who are designed to be the safety net for kids who are struggling. And
I didn't think it was anti-parent. That's not how I read it, although I haven't read her book, but that's not what I understand that she was saying.
That's what she says a lot. We're undermining parental authority by outsourcing parenting to experts.
I thought she was more saying in the idea of parental authority, more that what Jessie was talking about, where you doubt yourself, where you think, well, I'm not equipped to help my child who's feeling sad because the cat died. I have to send my child to therapy to be considered a good parent because I don't know how to help them, even though I've had cats that died when I was a kid and I've got some ideas, but I couldn't possibly know anything because I'm just a parent. I don't think there's some conspiracy, and I don't think she's alleging some conspiracy that mental health professionals are trying to disempower parents.
Well, she actually is. That's very much what she says. Her point is linked to what Jessie says, that it's become so pervasive. So she's not necessarily attacking the system altogether, but she's basically saying that parents have become disenfranchised, disempowered, and they're outsourcing. And, you know, of course there's a link, a capitalist link there to the fact that there's a whole industry making a lot of money out of therapizing children. But I'll just push back and say, you know what? Not all parents are equipped. I certainly was not equipped to be dealing with a child who has neurodiversity. I needed to be educated. I needed to find out. This sort of everybody should just pull their socks up and trust their gut and, you know, toughen up everybody, which is very much the message, is very simplistic. Did we really think that as we learn more about everything, including the brain, including therapy, including the different ways that different people thrive in different environments, that nothing would change in the way that we educate and help children? Like, we are literally living through, thanks to technology, the period of fastest change that has ever happened. And
plus
yet somehow there's a sort of school of thought that the old way was the right way and we shouldn't have changed anything. And I struggle with that because I think that a lot of kids did not thrive in that environment. A lot of families did not thrive in that environment. And a lot of parents didn't thrive in that environment.
I think that as with many things, the truth is somewhere in the middle, right? It's not saying, you know, make parenting great again because, you know, children used to be hit with wooden spoons and belts and canes at school. I don't think anyone, well, I certainly wouldn't be advocating that. It's more, you know, these things are a series of pendulums. And I want to go back to something you said, Jessie, which I thought was so interesting about the idea that children believe they're entitled to happiness. Now, overall, that's a great belief. But in every moment, are they entitled? Like, school, I once read an article about this where a parent said, her child said, I get no joy. I don't get a moment of joy at school. And her parent was like, oh, it didn't occur to me that school was meant to make me happy. That was for lunchtime and that was for my friends and that was for other things. But this idea that I deserve, just like I deserve a ribbon for running in the race, whether I place or not, I deserve to be happy at every given moment. Now, that's just not realistic. And surely that is putting such a burden on parents and educators that children have to be happy all the time. Have we stuffed that up in making them think that that's their right?
I think so. And I think that the intent and the effect of what parents are doing could be two different things. What I will say is that, and Holly, I think you're speaking to this too, it's lacking some clear answers. Like what I took away from it was that I think the permissive gentle parenting, and look, there are debates about what gentle parenting is, but helicopter parenting is actually harder. So I think that if she is saying you can take a step back, you can let the child walk to school or whatever it is, you've got to let them make mistakes, all that, I think that's maybe taking a bit of a burden off parents.
But her point is that the reason that we've all become permissive is because we don't want to do it. Like that disciplining is harder.
Which is
and this
true.
is true. Any parent, you're not at this phase yet, Jessie, but any parent will tell you that if your kid does something naughty at the dinner table or when you're out or whatever, it is much harder to step in and say, I said we were going home if you did that again, and actually pull the kid out and go home, or send the kid to their room in the middle of dinner when that means that you're then going to have to do it. Like,
or say no screens and then you're like, oh, shit.
100%. And there was some really interesting survey out yesterday about screen time. Her argument is that parents are taking the easy way out. And I would say that needs a lot of nuance because there are a whole lot of different demands on parents than there were in the so-called golden era that she is often referring to.
Long distance friendships, they are, well, without my long distance friends, I'd just be left with you two, basically. Most of my closest friends are long distance, and by that we mean a plane ride away. Holly's bestest friend in the world hasn't lived in the same country as her for
30 years.
800 years. Two of your closest friends don't live in your state either. So we had a conversation about what we think the keys to maintaining those friendships are in a subs episode. Here's a little squeak of what we spoke about.
One of the things that people always want to know is how you maintain friendships long distance.
How are we defining a long distance friendship?
I think it's a plane trip.
Plane trip.
I'm going to go plane trip.
But the thing is that if I had to maintain my friendship, like nurture it like a cucumber, it would have died a long time ago. The key to it is that we're both the kind of people who don't need that constant watering.
A squeak. There's a link in the show notes.
I like that. A little squeak. Were we squeaky?
You can listen to us squawking and squeaking. Become a subscriber. We'd love it if you did.
And can I also add in, Out Loud, as you may have seen, we've got a new logo, slightly different colour. Change is difficult. We have established that, and we have hopefully provided a little bit of therapy.
Because your eyes get used to seeing it in the feed, or maybe think it's not been there. Actually, it has. It just looks different.
Exactly. And so, a little bonus recommendation. Follow your favourite podcasts. I don't do this, and I need to get into the habit.
I'm so spun out by this. What do you mean? How do you find the podcasts that you follow?
I manually search. Yeah.
So you go, I want to listen to No Filter. I'm going to type in. You are weird.
I know.
All you have to do, because, algorithms, is type in no, and No Filter will come up. And then I go, that one.
But you have to remember every podcast that
this
you
is why
follow.
I forget. I go, I haven't listened to Cancelled in a month. That's right. Forgot that existed. So go to your favourite podcasts, click follow, and then it will automatically come up and you'll know what to listen to.
Thanks for listening to Remedial Podcast Usage. Brought to you by Jessie and Holly.
You might have noticed that another thing that's changed is that we are keeping our recommendations for Friday's show. But if you sign up to the Mamamia Out Loud newsletter, you will also get all our recos for the week in one place and all the behind-the-scenes gossip from the show. So you want to do that. Thank you for listening to us on Australia's #1 news and pop culture show. This episode was produced by the marvellous Emeline Gazilas. The assistant producer is Tahli Blackman, and we've had audio production from Leah Porges.
Bye.
Bye.
Shout out to any Mamamia subscribers listening. If you love the show and you want to support us, subscribing to Mamamia is the very best way to do so. There's a link in the episode description.